My name is Amanda Matthews, and at 32 years old, I never expected that my expertise as a senior financial analyst at Westbrook Financial Group would become both my shield and my sword. After 5 dedicated years climbing the corporate ladder, I found myself at the center of a scandal that would rock our entire company. It all started with a photo and a note pinned by my new boss, Richard Taylor. Little did he know, the lesson he wanted to teach me would end up being one he learned instead. If you are watching this from your workplace right now, drop a comment below and let me know what city you are tuning in from. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up to workplace injustice. My journey at Westbrook Financial Group began shortly after I completed my MBA from Northwestern University. The recruitment process had been rigorous. 3 rounds of interviews, a technical assessment, and a final meeting with the department head had all been part of the gauntlet I ran to secure my position as a junior analyst. Westbrook was not just any financial firm. It was a prestigious institution managing billions in investments for clients, ranging from wealthy individuals to massive pension funds. Getting my foot in the door had been a major accomplishment. I still remember my first day, walking through the gleaming glass doors of the 40-story building in downtown Chicago, my heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. The security guard had smiled as he handed me my temporary badge, and I had felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement bubbling in my stomach. This was the beginning of something big, I had thought. I had no idea how right I would be, but for reasons I could never have anticipated. During my first 5 years at Westbrook, I had proven myself time and again. My analytical skills and attention to detail had earned me 2 promotions, taking me from junior analyst to my current role as a senior financial analyst. The hours were long, often stretching well into the evening, but the work was rewarding. I found satisfaction in detecting patterns in financial data that others missed, in making connections that could save clients money or increase their returns. The company culture had been demanding but fair under my previous boss, Jonathan Willis. A man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a penchant for colorful bow ties, Jonathan had been strict about deadlines and precision, but generous with praise when it was deserved. He had created a meritocratic environment where hard work was recognized and rewarded. When I had spotted a potential issue in a major investment portfolio that could have cost clients millions, Jonathan had not only thanked me publicly, but had recommended me for my first promotion. I had made some good friends at Westbrook over the years. Jessica Ramirez, a woman 10 years, my senior who had taken me under her wing from day one, had become both a mentor and a friend. Our lunch breaks together had been filled with professional advice and personal stories. Then there was Tyler Jenkins from IT, a friendly tech specialist who had always been willing to help when my computer inevitably decided to crash right before a major deadline. And Diane Foster, in HR, a fair-minded woman who had handled any issues that arose with professionalism and discretion. Everything changed 6 months ago when Jonathan announced his retirement. The news had sent a ripple of concern through our department. Who would replace him? Would the new boss maintain the culture Jonathan had carefully cultivated? The answer came in the form of Richard Taylor, a slick executive recruited from our main competitor, Wallace Investment Partners. The day Richard was introduced to our team, something felt off. Maybe it was his too perfect smile that never quite reached his eyes, or the way he spoke about how he planned to shake things up and modernize our outdated processes, implicitly criticizing the system that had been working well under Jonathan. Whatever it was, a knot of unease had formed in my stomach as I watched him scan the conference room, his gaze lingering just a beat too long on certain people, assessing, categorizing. The first few weeks under Richard had confirmed my initial misgivings. His management style was nothing like Jonathan's. Where Jonathan had distributed credit generously to team members, Richard claimed every success as primarily his own doing. When projects faced challenges, suddenly, it was the team that was at fault. Phrases like "our success" and "my team" quickly morphed into "my strategy" and "your failures." The warning signs multiplied. I found myself excluded from meetings I would previously have attended. When I did make it into the room, My contributions were often interrupted or dismissed, only to be rephrased by Richard minutes later and presented as brilliant insights. The micromanagement was suffocating. Reports that had once been approved with minor edits were now being sent back multiple times with arbitrary changes that often contradicted previous directions. I tried to adapt. I documented all communications, came extra prepared to meetings, and attempted to build rapport with Richard, thinking perhaps I had somehow gotten off on the wrong foot. Nothing worked. If anything, my competence seemed to irritate him more. Jessica noticed it too. "You are on his radar, and not in a good way," she had whispered to me one day, after a particularly tense department meeting. "He sees you as a threat." "But I just do my job," I had replied, confused by the politics that seemed to be overtaking the meritocratic environment I had thrived in. "Sometimes that is enough to make you a target," Jessica had said, her expression grim. "Just watch your back, Amanda." Little did I know I would soon need eyes in the back of my head. As weeks turned into months under Richard's leadership, his hostility toward me grew increasingly obvious. It seemed that the more I excelled despite his attempts to undermine me, the more determined he became to break my spirit or force me out. The sabotage became more blatant. There was the time I had spent weeks preparing for a presentation to potential investors, only to arrive at the meeting and discover that Richard had made substantial changes to my slides the night before without informing me. I had to present information I was seeing for the first time, as though I had prepared it myself. When one of the investors asked a detailed question about a modified projection, Richard had smirked as I struggled to explain data I had not created. Another incident occurred when Richard deliberately withheld crucial information about a client's risk tolerance change before I conducted a portfolio review. I had proceeded based on outdated parameters, resulting in recommendations that no longer aligned with the client's needs. When the client expressed confusion, Richard had stepped in smoothly, apologizing for my oversight and presenting the correct approach, as though saving the day. Meanwhile, Richard had been building his inner circle of allies within the department. Some were former colleagues he had brought with him from Wallace Investment Partners. Others were ambitious team members who saw aligning with Richard as a path to advancement. This group received preferential treatment. They were assigned to high-profile projects, invited to exclusive lunches with upper management, and their mistakes were quietly fixed rather than publicly criticized. I was definitely not part of this circle. In fact, it seemed I had been cast as the designated scapegoat, the example of what not to do if you wanted to succeed under Richard's reign. Despite this toxic environment, I remained committed to doing my job well. This dedication led me to discover something concerning while reviewing financial projections for an upcoming quarterly report. There were significant errors in the forecasting models that Richard had personally approved. These were not small discrepancies, but substantial miscalculations that would materially misrepresent our expected performance to shareholders. I found myself facing an ethical dilemma. If I pointed out the errors, Richard would likely see it as another challenge to his authority and escalate his campaign against me. If I remained silent, the company could make decisions based on faulty data, potentially leading to financial losses and eroding investor trust. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I chose professional integrity over self-preservation. I carefully documented all the errors, prepared a corrected model, and requested a meeting with Richard and the senior team members involved in the quarterly reporting process. The meeting had been tense from the start. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, his expression cool, as I distributed printed copies of my findings. I noticed some inconsistencies in our projections. For next quarter, I began keeping my tone neutral and professional. I have prepared a revised model that I believe more accurately reflects our expected performance. Richard's jaw had tightened as I walked everyone through the errors and my corrections. With each point I made, the other team members exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the significance of the discrepancies. These errors would have led us to overstate our projected earnings by nearly 20%, I concluded. The revised model still shows growth, just at a more modest and realistic rate. A heavy silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to Richard. His face had flushed red and a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. Well, he had finally said, his voice strained with barely contained anger. It appears Amanda has saved us from a potentially embarrassing situation. Of course, if she had brought these concerns directly to me first, we could have addressed them privately. The implication was clear. I had publicly humiliated him by exposing his mistakes in front of the team. The fact that I had actually emailed him my concerns 2 days prior and received no response was conveniently ignored. The meeting concluded with Richard grudgingly instructing the team to implement my corrections. As everyone filed out, he had asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, his artificial smile disappeared entirely. "That was quite a performance, Amanda," he had said, his voice low and threatening. "But you should understand something. In this department, chain of command matters. Public surprises like that are not how we do things." "I only wanted to ensure the accuracy of our reporting," I had replied evenly. Richard had leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "You know, some people need to learn their place in an organization, how the game is really played." His smile returned then, but it was cold and did not reach his eyes. "This is not just about being right, it is about being smart. I hope you are smart, Amanda." The threat was unmistakable. As I left his office, a chill ran down my spine. I immediately sought out Jessica in the break room, needing to confide in someone I trusted. "He basically threatened me, Jessica," I had whispered, my hands shaking slightly as I poured coffee into my mug. Jessica had glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Richard does not like to lose face. And you just showed up his work in front of half the senior team." "I just did my job. The projections were wrong." "I know," Jessica had sighed, "and you were right to fix them. But be careful now. Richard has a reputation from his previous company. People who crossed him tended to find themselves sidelined or eventually pushed out." I had taken a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. So what should I do? Document everything Jessica had advised. Every email, every report, every conversation. And maybe start updating your resume, just in case. I hate to say it, but Richard's had it out for you since day one, and now you have given him a reason to escalate. Little did I know just how quickly that escalation would come. The following Monday, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I had spent the weekend preparing for a client meeting scheduled for that afternoon, determined to stay focused on my work, despite the growing tension with Richard. As I walked through the department, I noticed several colleagues glancing my way before quickly averting their eyes. A hushed conversation between 2 junior analysts abruptly ceased as I approached. Something was off. The atmosphere felt charged with an uncomfortable energy. When I greeted Stephanie, a friendly analyst who usually stopped to chat, she gave me a strained smile and hurried past with a mumbled "good morning." It was as if I had suddenly become radioactive. At my desk, I tried to focus on reviewing my notes for the client meeting, but the strange behavior of my colleagues kept distracting me. Finally, I noticed Lisa from accounting stopping by Jessica's desk. They spoke in hushed tones, with Lisa repeatedly glancing in my direction. After Lisa left, Jessica immediately made a beeline for my cubicle. "Have you been to the HR department this morning?" she asked. Without preamble, her expression concerned. "No, why would I?" I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. Jessica hesitated. "There is something you should see. Just do not react too strongly in public." "Okay." Now thoroughly alarmed, I followed Jessica to the elevator. As we rode up to the 14th floor where HR was located, she explained what she had heard. Apparently something involving me had been posted on the HR bulletin board, and it was causing quite a stir throughout the office. The HR department at Westbrook occupied a large open area with several offices around the perimeter. In the central space was a bulletin board, typically used for company announcements, benefit information, and occasionally birthday celebrations or retirement notices. As we entered, I immediately spotted a small cluster of people standing near the board, whispering among themselves. They dispersed quickly when they saw me approaching. And then I saw it. Pinned prominently to the center of the board was my company ID photo, the standard headshot, taken when I first joined Westbrook 5 years ago. Beneath it, written on a yellow sticky note in handwriting, I did not recognize, were the words, needs a lesson in respect and loyalty. I felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. My photo publicly displayed like some kind of wanted poster with that demeaning note for everyone to see. Heat rushed to my face, a mixture of embarrassment and rage building inside me. "What is this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica put a hand on my arm, either in support or to prevent me from doing something rash. I was not sure. "We should talk to Diane," she suggested, nodding toward the office of the HR representative we both trusted. Diane Foster looked up from her computer as we knocked on her open door. Her expression shifted from professional welcome to discomfort when she recognized us. Before either Jessica or I could speak, Diane stood up and closed her office door. "I was just about to call you, Amanda," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "That display on the board is completely inappropriate. I came in this morning and found it already posted." "Who put it there?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. Diane hesitated. "I do not know for certain. It was already up when the HR team arrived this morning, which means someone must have put it up either late Friday or very early today." "But you must have some idea," Jessica pressed. "This is not just unprofessional, it is harassment." Diane fidgeted with a pen on her desk. "Look, I want to be helpful, but this is a delicate situation. All I can say is that there has been some discussion among management about ensuring team members understand the importance of proper channels and hierarchy." The corporate speak was thinly veiled, but the message was clear enough. This was not a random act, but something with management approval, which meant Richard was almost certainly behind it. "So what are you going to do about it?" I asked Diane directly. "I will take the photo down immediately, of course," Diane replied quickly. "And I can open an investigation into who posted it, though I cannot promise any results." Jessica scoffed. "That is it. Someone publicly humiliates Amanda in a professional workplace, and all you can offer is to take it down and conduct an investigation that will go nowhere." Diane spread her hands helplessly. "I understand your frustration, but these matters are complicated. There could be a misunderstanding about the intent." "A misunderstanding," I repeated incredulously. What possible legitimate intent could there be for posting my photo with a note saying, "I need to be taught a lesson"? Diane had no good answer. As we left her office, I saw her immediately head to the bulletin board and remove my photo. But the damage was already done. Everyone had seen it. The message had been sent, "Challenge Richard Taylor, and you will be publicly shamed." My initial shock was rapidly hardening into anger. Without discussing it with Jessica, I made a decision. I needed to confront this directly. "I will see you later," I told Jessica as we reached her desk. "Where are you going?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "To have a conversation about professional workplace conduct," I replied, already walking toward Richard's office. His assistant, a nervous young man named Kyle, who had been hired shortly after Richard took over, attempted to stop me. "Mr. Taylor is on a call," he began, but I walked past him. "He can call them back," I said firmly. Richard was indeed on the phone when I entered, but the conversation did not sound urgent. Something about golf tee times for the weekend. He looked up in surprise as I entered unannounced, then quickly ended his call. "Amanda," he said, leaning back in his leather chair with an expression of mild curiosity. "This is unexpected. We do not have a meeting scheduled, do we?" "We need to talk about the photo posted on the HR bulletin board," I stated, directly closing the door behind me. A flash of something satisfaction perhaps crossed his face, before he composed his features into a look of innocent confusion. "Photo? I am not sure what you mean." My company photo was pinned to the HR bulletin board with a note saying I need a lesson in respect and loyalty, I said, watching his reaction closely. "It is unprofessional, inappropriate, and potentially constitutes workplace harassment." Richard steepled his fingers, all pretense of confusion dropping away. "Sometimes, Amanda, public examples need to be made so that everyone understands the culture we are trying to build here." "So you admit you were behind it?" I asked, though it was hardly a question at this point. He shrugged. Let us just say I believe in clear communication. Your behavior last week ambushing me with those projection corrections in front of the team demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work here now. I followed all proper protocols I countered. I emailed you my concerns 2 days before the meeting and received no response. Richard waved his hand dismissively. The point is, you are not adapting well to the new direction of this department. Perhaps Westbrook is no longer the right fit for your, shall we say, independent approach. The implication was crystal clear. My career at Westbrook was effectively over unless I was willing to abandon my professional ethics and become one of Richard's yes people. The thought made my stomach turn. I see was all I said. Richard must have interpreted my brief response as defeat, because a smug smile spread across his face. I am glad we understand each other now. Sometimes these little object lessons are necessary. No hard feelings, I hope. I did not dignify that with a response. As I turned to leave, Richard called after me. Oh, and Amanda, the Campbell client meeting this afternoon. I will be handling that personally now. I think it is best given the circumstances. I nodded stiffly and left his office. To anyone watching, I must have appeared defeated. Kyle, Richard's assistant, averted his eyes as I passed his desk. In the hallway, I noticed several colleagues quickly pretending they had not been watching the confrontation through the glass walls of Richard's office. Little did Richard know, appearing defeated was exactly what I wanted him to think. Because while he saw this as the end of the matter, I knew it was just the beginning. Back at my desk, I kept my head down and expression neutral, aware that curious eyes were watching for my reaction. To anyone observing, I must have looked like someone just handed a professional death sentence. That perception was crucial to my plan. In reality, my mind was racing, formulating a strategy. Richard had made a critical error in his campaign against me. He had crossed the line from professional undermining to documented harassment, and he had done it publicly. But more importantly, his behavior had reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten, something that now might be my only leverage. 3 months ago, before Richard's vendetta against me had fully escalated, I had been assigned to the due diligence team for a major acquisition Westbrook was considering. The target was Suncoast Financial, a regional investment firm with a solid client base that would expand our presence in the Southeast. My role had been to analyze their compliance with banking regulations, a tedious but crucial part of any financial acquisition. During my investigation, I had discovered some concerning irregularities in Suncoast's adherence to federal banking regulations. Nothing criminal, but definitely in the gray area, with potential for significant fines if regulatory bodies took a close look. I had documented these issues thoroughly in my report, including specific transactions that raised red flags. When I submitted my findings, Richard had been dismissive. The issues I identified were, in his words, minor technicalities that would not impact the overall acquisition value. He instructed me to revise my report, downplaying the compliance concerns. When I had expressed hesitation, he reminded me sharply that the acquisition was a top priority for the board. At the time, I had reluctantly made the revisions as instructed, but I had saved all my original documentation and notes, along with Richard's emails directing the changes. It was standard practice for me to keep thorough records, but I had been particularly careful with this project, uncomfortable with the direction I had been given. Now that documentation might be my salvation. I opened my computer and began organizing my evidence. First, I pulled together all emails from Richard regarding the Suncoast acquisition, particularly those instructing me to downplay compliance issues. Then I collected my original analysis, showing the regulatory red flags, along with supporting documentation. I added notes from meetings where these issues were discussed, including dates, times, and attendees. Next, I gathered evidence of Richard's harassment. I wrote a detailed account of the photo incident, while it was fresh in my mind, noting everyone who might have witnessed it. I added screenshots of emails, showing my attempt to address the projection errors through proper channels before the team meeting. I even had a photograph Jessica had discreetly taken of my picture on the HR bulletin board before it was removed. As I worked, I considered my options carefully. I could go to HR, but Diane's lukewarm response earlier suggested I would find little support there. Richard's relationship with the department head, Alexander Wright, appeared strong, so that route seemed equally unpromising. There was one person at Westbrook who might be willing to listen, someone known for her uncompromising stance on ethical issues and regulatory compliance. Eleanor Blackwell, the company's chief financial officer, had built her reputation on running a tight ship, financially and ethically. She had started her career at the Securities and Exchange Commission before moving to the private sector, and she brought that regulatory mindset with her. Office rumors suggested she and Richard had clashed several times already over his aggressive growth strategies. It was a risk. Eleanor was high up in the company hierarchy, and approaching her directly about a departmental issue could be seen as circumventing proper channels, exactly what Richard had accused me of doing. But given the nature of the issues involved, particularly the potential regulatory violations, I felt the risk was justified. I composed a carefully worded email to Eleanor, requesting an urgent meeting regarding concerning findings from the Suncoast due diligence that I believed posed significant regulatory and reputational risks to Westbrook. I made no mention of Richard or the harassment, focusing solely on the compliance issues that would be squarely within her purview. After reading the email 3 times to ensure it struck the right tone, I hit send. Then I gathered my documentation into a secure folder and backed it up to my personal cloud storage just in case. A response from Eleanor came faster than I expected. She would see me in 30 minutes in her office on the executive floor. My heart raced as I read her brief reply. This was happening. I spent the next 20 minutes refining my presentation of the issues, ensuring I could explain the technical compliance matters clearly and concisely. 5 minutes before the meeting, I packed up my laptop and notes. As I prepared to leave for the executive floor, I noticed Richard and his inner circle heading out, presumably for their regular Friday lunch, at the expensive steakhouse down the street. Richard caught my eye as they passed, and I made sure to avert my gaze quickly as if cowed. He smirked and said something to the group that caused them to laugh as they continued toward the elevator. Perfect timing. Richard would be gone for at least 90 minutes, giving me plenty of time to meet with Eleanor without his knowledge. Just as I stood to leave, Jessica approached my desk. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I heard about the confrontation with Richard." "I am fine," I assured her, surprised at how calm I actually felt now that I had a plan. "Just going to take a short break, clear my head." Jessica looked concerned but nodded. "Want company?" "I need a few minutes alone, but thanks," I replied, appreciating her offer. "I will find you when I get back." As I walked through the department, I maintained the appearance of someone taking a dejected break after a professional setback. Several colleagues gave me sympathetic glances, but quickly looked away when I noticed them. The office grapevine had clearly been busy. Once in the elevator, I pressed the button for the executive floor, taking deep breaths to center myself. This meeting could determine not just my future at Westbrook, but potentially the company's regulatory standing as well. I needed to be composed, professional, and absolutely clear about the facts. The executive floor was a different world from our department. Plush carpeting replaced the standard commercial flooring. The lighting was softer, coming from elegant fixtures rather than fluorescent panels. Instead of cubicles, this floor featured wide hallways, leading to spacious offices with actual doors. Eleanor Blackwell's assistant, a polished woman in her 40s, greeted me with professional courtesy. "Miss Blackwell is expecting you," she said, leading me to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Eleanor herself was an imposing presence. In her late 50s, with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes, she exuded competence and authority. She stood as I entered, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "Amanda Matthews," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from her desk. "Your email suggested some urgent concerns about Suncoast. I must admit I was surprised to hear from you directly rather than through Richard or Alexander." "I apologize for the unconventional approach, Miss Blackwell," I began. "But after careful consideration, I felt these issues warranted your immediate attention." She regarded me thoughtfully for a moment. Very well. What have you found that is so concerning? Taking a deep breath, I opened my laptop and began my presentation. For the next 20 minutes, I walked Eleanor through my original findings regarding Suncoast's questionable compliance practices, the documentation supporting my concerns, and the potential regulatory implications. I then reluctantly explained how I had been directed to downplay these issues in my final report, showing her the original and revised versions side by side. As I spoke, Eleanor's expression grew increasingly grave. She interrupted occasionally with sharp, insightful questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of regulatory matters. When I finished my explanation of the compliance issues, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "This is indeed concerning, Amanda," she said finally. "But I sense there is more to this story than just the Suncoast compliance matters. Why bring this to me now, months after the due diligence was completed?" It was the opening I needed. Carefully, I explained the growing pattern of hostile behavior from Richard, culminating in the photo incident earlier that day. I presented the evidence I had collected, including Jessica's photograph of the bulletin board. Eleanor listened without interruption, her face darkening as I recounted the events. When I finished, she was silent for several long moments. "Let me be sure I understand the situation," she said at last. "You identified legitimate compliance concerns during the Suncoast due diligence. You were instructed to downplay these issues in your official report. When you recently challenged other errors in financial projections, you became the target of what appears to be workplace harassment by your department head. Is that an accurate summary?" "Yes, Miss Blackwell," I confirmed. She nodded once decisively. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Amanda. I will need copies of all the documentation you have shown me today." I provided her with digital copies of everything along with my contact information. "What happens now?" I asked. Eleanor fixed me with a direct gaze. "Now I suggest you return to your desk and continue your work as normal. Say nothing about this meeting to anyone. I will handle the matter from here." As I stood to leave, she added, "And Amanda, it took courage to come forward with this information. That is noted and appreciated." I returned to my department, outwardly maintaining the appearance of someone still processing a professional setback. Inside, however, I felt a growing sense of cautious optimism. I had presented my case clearly and professionally, and Eleanor had seemed to take my concerns seriously. Now all I could do was wait and see what would happen when Richard returned from lunch. Richard returned from lunch just after 2 o'clock, his inner circle trailing behind him. I could hear their laughter even before I saw them, the sound of people secure in their positions and power. Through my peripheral vision, I watched as Richard noticed something unusual happening in the department. The normal afternoon buzz of activity had been replaced by a tense silence, and several executives I did not recognize were standing near the conference room. Richard's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, approaching the group with his hand extended. As he greeted them, I recognized one of the executives as Howard Spencer Westbrook's general counsel. The other was Patricia Alvarez, the head of the compliance department. Both looked extremely serious. I could not hear the conversation, but I saw Richard's expression shift from confident to confused as Howard gestured toward the conference room. Richard glanced back at his lunch companions, gave them a reassuring nod, and followed Howard and Patricia inside. Through the glass walls, I could see that Eleanor Blackwell was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents spread before her. The conference room door closed, and blinds that were rarely used were drawn, blocking the view from the department floor. A collective hush fell over the office, as everyone pretended to work, while speculating wildly about what was happening. Jessica appeared at my desk, her eyes wide. "What is going on?" she whispered. "The CFO, legal and compliance, all in one meeting with Richard. That is not a routine check-in." I shrugged, trying to appear as mystified as everyone else. "No idea," I replied, focusing on my computer screen. "But it looks serious." For the next hour, the department operated in a state of suspended animation. Work continued, but every few minutes, someone would glance toward the conference room, trying to discern what was happening behind those closed blinds. Then at 3:15 my desk phone rang. It was Eleanor Blackwell's assistant requesting my immediate presence in the conference room. As I stood and straightened my blazer, I could feel dozens of eyes following me. The walk across the department floor seemed to take forever, each step echoing in the unusual quiet. I knocked once on the conference room door and entered when instructed. The atmosphere inside was frigid. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her expression severe. Howard Spencer and Patricia Alvarez flanked her on either side, both with legal pads covered in notes. Richard sat alone on the opposite side, his face flushed, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. "Please sit down," Amanda Eleanor directed, gesturing to a chair midway down the table, not too close to either her group or Richard. As I took my seat, Richard shot me a venomous glance before quickly composing his features into a neutral expression. Eleanor did not waste time on pleasantries. "Miss Matthews, we have been discussing some serious concerns regarding the Suncoast acquisition due diligence and certain workplace incidents that have recently occurred. Mr. Taylor has given us his perspective on these matters. We would like to hear directly from you on several points." What followed was a methodical questioning session. Howard asked me to recount exactly what I had found during the Suncoast due diligence, while Patricia probed the specific regulatory issues I had identified. I answered each question clearly and precisely, referencing the documentation I had provided earlier. Throughout this exchange, Richard remained uncharacteristically silent, his jaw clenched tight. When the questions turned to the incidents of harassment, including the photo on the bulletin board, he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Taylor has characterized the photo incident as a motivational technique, a way to encourage stronger team communication." Eleanor stated her tone, making it clear what she thought of this explanation. "Would you care to respond to that characterization?" "With respect, I cannot see how publicly posting someone's photograph with a note stating they need a lesson could be considered motivational in any professional context," I replied evenly. "I experienced it as humiliating and threatening, particularly following Mr. Taylor's comment that some people need to learn their place." Richard leaned forward, his composure finally breaking. "This is absurd," he exploded. "She is manipulating the situation to cover for her own insubordination. I was trying to build a cohesive team, and she repeatedly undermined my authority." Eleanor fixed Richard with an icy stare until he fell silent. "Mr. Taylor, you have had your opportunity to explain your actions. Right now we are hearing from Miss Matthews." Turning back to me, Eleanor continued with her questions. When we had covered all the issues I had raised in our earlier meeting, she thanked me and asked if I had anything to add. "Only that everything I have shared is thoroughly documented," I said. "I have always strived to maintain the highest professional and ethical standards in my work at Westbrook, even when doing so was difficult." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you, Miss Matthews. That will be all for now. Please return to your desk and continue with your regular duties." As I stood to leave, Richard spoke again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is not over. You have no idea what you've done." Before I could respond, Howard Spencer interjected sharply. "Mr. Taylor, I strongly advise you to refrain from making any statements that could be construed as threatening." Richard's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes burned with fury as I exited the conference room. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but it was nearly impossible. The department had erupted into hushed conversations as soon as I returned, everyone speculating about what was happening. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, unwilling to feed the rumor mill. 20 minutes later, the conference room door opened. Richard emerged first, his face a mask of controlled rage. Without acknowledging anyone, he strode directly to his office, closed the door, and immediately closed the blinds. Eleanor, Howard, and Patricia followed shortly after, their expressions giving nothing away as they headed toward the elevator. As the executive team disappeared, the tension in the department shifted from curiosity to anxiety. Richard's inner circle gathered in a tight huddle near the break room, casting frequent glances toward his office, and occasionally in my direction. Jessica appeared at my cubicle again. "Okay, you have to tell me what is happening," she whispered urgently. "I honestly can't right now," I replied quietly. "But I think things are going to change around here." Before Jessica could press further, my phone rang again. It was Eleanor's assistant requesting my presence in the CFO's office immediately. As I stood to leave, Jessica gave me a wide-eyed look that clearly said, "You better tell me everything later." The executive floor was quieter than before, the end of day approaching. Eleanor's assistant ushered me directly into the office without making me wait. This time Eleanor was alone, reviewing documents at her desk. "Please close the door and have a seat, Amanda," she said, looking up as I entered. I did as instructed, my heart pounding despite my outwardly calm demeanor. Eleanor came straight to the point. "Mr. Taylor has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into both the harassment issues and the Suncoast compliance concerns. We take both matters extremely seriously." Relief washed over me. I had been heard. The evidence had been compelling enough for immediate action. "Thank you, Miss Blackwell," I said sincerely. She held up a hand. "This is not a favor to you, Amanda. This is Westbrook protecting its regulatory standing and enforcing its workplace policies. The investigation will be thorough and objective. All parties will have the opportunity to present their case." "I understand," I nodded, appreciating her professionalism. That said, Eleanor continued, "Your documentation was meticulous, and your presentation of the issues was precise and professional. Those qualities are valued at Westbrook regardless of what you may have experienced recently in your department." She shuffled some papers on her desk. "For the immediate future, you will report directly to me. I would like you to work with the compliance team on a comprehensive review of the Suncoast acquisition. Your familiarity with the issues will be valuable." "I am happy to help in any way I can," I replied, surprised but pleased by this development. Eleanor fixed me with a penetrating gaze. "I need absolute discretion from you, Amanda. No discussing the details of either investigation with colleagues. No speculation about outcomes. Is that clear?" "Completely clear," I assured her. She nodded once. "Very good. Patricia Alvarez will contact you tomorrow morning to begin the compliance review. That will be all for now." As I stood to leave, Eleanor added, "And Amanda, this took courage. Not everyone would have come forward, especially given the circumstances. I respect that. It was the closest thing to personal approval I would get from Eleanor Blackwell, and I valued it immensely." With a respectful nod, I left her office and headed back downstairs. News travels fast in corporate environments, and by the following morning, the entire company was buzzing with rumors about Richard Taylor's sudden administrative leave. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed people glancing my way, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. The atmosphere in our department had transformed overnight. Richard's inner circle looked shell-shocked, huddling together near the coffee machine, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever anyone approached. Others seemed cautiously optimistic, as if a heavy weight had been lifted, but they were not quite sure if it was safe to celebrate yet. Jessica was waiting at my desk when I arrived. "Okay, spill," she demanded in a whisper. "Richard is on leave. You were in meetings with the CFO, and half the floor thinks you're either a hero or a traitor, depending on which side they're on." "I can't discuss the details," I replied quietly, "but I will tell you that I presented evidence of some concerning issues to Eleanor Blackwell, and the company is taking it seriously." Jessica studied my face for a moment, then broke into a wide smile. "I knew you were up to something when you left yesterday. You didn't just take it lying down." "I had documentation," I said simply. "Sometimes the best defense is just having your facts in order." Our conversation was interrupted by a call from Patricia Alvarez, asking me to join the compliance team in their conference room. As I gathered my laptop and notes, Jessica gave me a thumbs up. "Go get him, Tiger," she whispered. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I worked closely with the compliance team, reviewing every aspect of the Suncoast acquisition. Patricia was a demanding but fair leader, pushing us to be thorough while remaining objective. My original concerns about regulatory compliance were validated by the team's more comprehensive review, which uncovered additional issues I hadn't even identified in my initial analysis. Meanwhile, the HR investigation into Richard's harassment proceeded in parallel. Diane Foster, the HR representative, who had seemed so hesitant before now, approached me with questions about other incidents I might have experienced or witnessed. It seemed that once Richard was temporarily removed from his position of power, others began coming forward with their own stories of inappropriate behavior. Tyler from IT revealed that Richard had pressured him to provide access to team members' emails, a clear violation of company policy. Several junior analysts shared experiences of being belittled in meetings or having their work claimed by Richard. Even Kyle, Richard's nervous assistant, eventually admitted to witnessing his boss falsifying expense reports. The wave of revelations painted a picture of a department that had been functioning under a cloud of fear and manipulation. As each day passed, more people approached me in the break room or elevator to express their support or share their own experiences with Richard. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner or for participating in the toxic culture had created. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Richard's loyalists viewed me with open hostility. Allison Reynolds, who had been part of Richard's inner circle, made a point of loudly discussing corporate loyalty whenever I was within earshot. Michael Peterson, another of Richard's favorites, spread rumors that I had orchestrated a coup to position myself for promotion. I did my best to ignore the negativity and focus on the work at hand. Eleanor had assigned me a temporary office near the compliance department, which helped distance me from the worst of the department drama. Each evening I would meet Jessica for dinner or drinks, where she would update me on the latest office gossip, while I carefully avoided sharing any confidential information about the investigations. After 2 weeks of intensive work, the compliance team completed its initial review of the Suncoast acquisition. The findings were presented to Eleanor Howard and the board's audit committee in a closed-door meeting that lasted 3 hours. I had helped prepare the presentation, but was not invited to attend, which was appropriate given my junior position relative to the executives involved. The day after that meeting, I was called to Howard's office. The company's general counsel was a serious man in his 60s, with reading glasses perched permanently on the end of his nose. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his imposing desk. "Miss Matthews," he began, "I want to update you on where things stand. The compliance review you helped initiate has revealed significant issues that, if left unaddressed, could have exposed Westbrook to substantial regulatory penalties." He removed his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. "The board has authorized a voluntary disclosure to the appropriate regulatory bodies, along with a remediation plan. This proactive approach will hopefully mitigate any penalties, though some financial impact is inevitable." "I understand," I said, relieved that the company was taking the proper course of action. Howard replaced his glasses. "As for the workplace harassment investigation that has also concluded, the findings support your allegations and have uncovered additional policy violations by Mr. Taylor." He leaned forward slightly. "I am authorized to inform you that as of this morning, Richard Taylor's employment with Westbrook Financial Group has been terminated." The news hit me with surprising force. Despite everything I had half expected, Richard to somehow escape serious consequences. Corporate America had a long history of protecting executives, especially those who, like Richard, were skilled at claiming credit and deflecting blame. "What will happen to the department now?" I asked. "Alexander Wright will temporarily oversee day-to-day operations while we conduct a search for a new department head," Howard explained. "The board is committed to finding someone who will foster a more positive and ethical culture." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Eleanor Blackwell entered without waiting for a response, nodding briefly to me before addressing Howard. "The press release is ready for your final review," she said, handing him a document. Howard scanned it quickly. "This looks appropriate. Factual without unnecessary detail." Eleanor turned to me. "Amanda, I'd like you to join me in my office when you're finished here. There are some matters I'd like to discuss regarding your role going forward." After she left, Howard provided a few more details about the regulatory disclosure process, then concluded our meeting. As I rode the elevator to Eleanor's office, I wondered what she wanted to discuss about my future at Westbrook. Eleanor was reviewing financial reports when I entered her office, She gestured for me to sit while she finished reading a page, then looked up with her characteristically direct gaze. Amanda, the board and executive committee have been impressed with your handling of a difficult situation, she began. Your technical skills were already well established, but you've also demonstrated integrity, courage, and discretion under challenging circumstances. She placed her pen down precisely on her desk. These are qualities we value highly, particularly in our current situation, where we need to strengthen our compliance culture. My heart rate accelerated slightly. Was this leading where I thought it might be? We are creating a new internal compliance verification team, Eleanor continued. This group will conduct proactive reviews of our processes and transactions to ensure regulatory adherence before problems arise. I would like you to head this team. I blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm not even a director-level employee. Eleanor's expression remained serious. We are not looking for another hierarchical manager. We need someone with technical expertise who has proven they will stand by their principles even when it's difficult. Your education experience and recent actions make you an ideal candidate. She slid a folder across the desk. This contains the formal offer, including compensation details and reporting structure. The team would report directly to me, bypassing departmental management to ensure independence. Take some time to review it, and let me know your decision by Monday. I left Eleanor's office in a daze, the folder clutched in my hand. The offer represented a significant promotion, both in terms of responsibility and compensation. More importantly, it was a role where my analytical skills and ethical standards would be valued, rather than seen as threats. As I returned to the department to gather my things, I could feel the shift in how people regarded me. The hostile glares from Richard's former allies had been replaced by curious, sometimes admiring glances. Several colleagues stopped me to offer congratulations, though the specifics of my new role had not yet been announced. Jessica was waiting by my desk, practically bouncing with excitement. "Well," she demanded, "what happened?" "I'm not supposed to discuss the details yet," I replied, though I couldn't suppress a smile. "But it looks like things are going to be okay." Jessica hugged me impulsively. "I knew it. You stood up to that bully and came out on top. This calls for celebration. Drinks after work." "Absolutely," I agreed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "I think we've all earned it." As I packed up my belongings to move to my new office, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past few weeks. From the public humiliation of having my photo posted on that bulletin board, to now heading a new compliance team, the journey had been intense and unpredictable. But through it all, I had stayed true to my principles and professional standards. Richard had intended to teach me a lesson about power and hierarchy. Instead, he had inadvertently taught everyone at Westbrook a different lesson altogether, that integrity and courage still matter, even in the cutthroat world of high finance. 1 month after Richard's termination, I settled into my new role as head of internal compliance verification. My team consisted of 5 skilled analysts, drawn from various departments, each bringing unique perspectives to our work. We occupied a small suite of offices on the executive floor, symbolizing the importance Westbrook now placed on regulatory compliance. The results of the internal investigation had been more extensive than anyone anticipated. Richard's mismanagement went beyond harassment and the Suncoast compliance issues. The audit uncovered a pattern of misleading financial reporting, expense account abuse, and inappropriate client relationships that had been carefully concealed from upper management. Each discovery validated my decision to come forward, though the process had not been without challenges. For weeks I had endured whispers and sidelong glances in the cafeteria. Anonymous comments appeared on the company intranet, questioning my qualifications for the new position. Someone even started a rumor that I had been romantically involved with a board member, suggesting that was the real reason for my promotion. Jessica had been furious when she heard that particular bit of gossip. Want me to hunt down whoever started that and make them eat their words, she had offered over lunch. I had shaken my head. Let them talk. The work will speak for itself. And gradually it did. Our team's first project involved reviewing all major acquisitions from the past 3 years, identifying potential compliance issues before they could become problems. When we uncovered significant tax reporting errors in a previous acquisition that could have triggered an IRS audit, even the skeptics began to recognize the value of our work. Alexander Wright, still serving as interim department head, had initially viewed my new team with suspicion, perhaps seeing us as a rebuke of his leadership for allowing Richard's behavior to flourish. But after our work prevented a potentially costly regulatory issue, he became one of our strongest advocates. Alexander, I had never realized how vulnerable we were before your team spotted this, he admitted during a management meeting. You've saved us from what could have been a major headache. The broader changes at Westbrook were equally significant. HR implemented comprehensive harassment training for all employees with special sessions for managers. An anonymous reporting system was established for employees to flag ethical concerns without fear of retaliation. The board adopted new governance policies requiring regular compliance reviews of all major business decisions. Most importantly, the company culture began to shift. People spoke more openly in meetings, challenging ideas when necessary without fear of retribution. Junior analysts were encouraged to raise concerns, rather than simply defer to authority. The hierarchical structure remained, but it functioned with greater transparency and accountability. My relationship with Eleanor Blackwell evolved from formal reporting to genuine professional respect. Though never warm or effusive, she demonstrated her confidence in me by seeking my input on compliance aspects of strategic decisions. When I recommended against a potentially lucrative but legally questionable investment opportunity, she backed my assessment without hesitation. The most difficult part of my journey proved to be healing the relationships with colleagues who had remained silent during Richard's reign of intimidation. Some avoided me out of shame for not speaking up sooner. Others seemed to resent me for disrupting the status quo even if the changes were positive. Jessica had noticed my struggle. People are complicated. Amanda, she observed, as we walked to a lunch meeting. Some of them are processing their own guilt about not doing what you did. I think everyone was just trying to survive in a toxic environment, I replied. I don't blame them for that. That's why they respect you now, Jessica said. You found a way to stand up without standing on others. Gradually, those strained relationships began to heal. Tyler from IT brought me a coffee one morning and awkwardly thanked me for what I'd done. Give me a heads up if you ever need priority tech support, he offered with a shy smile. Diane from HR, who had been so hesitant to help with the photo incident, requested my input on strengthening the company's anti-harassment policies. I even managed to develop a cordial professional relationship with Kyle Richards' former assistant, who now supported Alexander and seemed relieved to work in a less stressful environment. Not every relationship could be repaired, of course. Allison and Michael, the most loyal members of Richard's inner circle, eventually left Westbrook for positions at other firms. Before she departed, Allison stopped by my office. You won, she said, her tone somewhere between bitter and respectful. But Richard will land on his feet. Guys like him always do. This wasn't about winning or losing, I replied evenly. It was about doing the right thing. She had given me a skeptical look before walking away. Perhaps from her perspective, corporate life was only about power dynamics and personal advancement. I hoped she would eventually find a workplace that helped her see beyond that limited view. As for Richard himself, I heard through industry contacts that he was struggling to find a position comparable to what he'd held at Westbrook. The financial world can be surprisingly small, and word of his ethics violations had spread. Last I heard, he had taken a significantly lower-level position at a small firm in another state. 6 months after the photo incident, Westbrook announced the appointment of a permanent head for our department. To everyone's surprise, the company promoted from within, selecting Jessica for the role. Her combination of technical expertise, institutional knowledge, and people skills made her an ideal choice to rebuild the department's culture. I will expect your compliance team to be extra tough on my department, she joked when she told me the news. No special treatment for old friends. Not a chance, I promised with a smile. But I know we won't find many issues. You'll run a tight ship. On the anniversary of my promotion to head the compliance team, Eleanor invited me to lunch, something unprecedented in our professional relationship. We sat in an upscale restaurant near the office, reviewing the past year's accomplishments. The board is very pleased with the changes your team has implemented, Eleanor noted, as we waited for our meals. Regulatory risk is down significantly, and we've avoided several potential issues that could have resulted in substantial penalties. I'm glad the work is proving valuable, I replied. It feels good to catch problems before they become crises. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. You know, Amanda, when you first came to my office with your concerns about Richard and Suncoast, I wasn't sure if you were a troublemaker or a whistleblower. I raised an eyebrow. And now I know you were neither, she said decisively. You were simply a professional, doing your job with integrity, even when it was difficult. That's rarer than it should be. Her words meant more to me than any formal recognition. Throughout my ordeal with Richard, I had sometimes questioned whether standing up for what was right would ultimately cost me my career. Instead, it had revealed my true professional value and helped transform the company culture for the better. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize that Richard's attempt to teach me a lesson about power and hierarchy backfired spectacularly. Instead, he taught everyone at Westbrook a much more important lesson: that integrity, documentation, and moral courage matter, even in the competitive world of finance. The photo he posted to humiliate me became a symbol of everything wrong with his leadership style. And my response, though frightening at the time, demonstrated that standing up against bullying and ethical breaches can ultimately benefit everyone involved except the bully. For anyone facing workplace harassment or ethical dilemmas, I would offer this advice: document everything. Know your worth, and be strategic in how you address the situation. Sometimes the loudest response isn't the most effective. And remember that integrity is not just a personal virtue, but ultimately the best career strategy. Have you ever had to stand up against workplace bullying or unethical behavior? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story helped you in any way, please like and subscribe for more real-life lessons from the corporate world. Remember, sometimes the most important lessons we learn are the ones we teach others by example. Thank you for listening, and I hope you find the courage to stand up for what's right in your own life and career.